I'm obviously a huge fan of barbecue. I like all barbecue, but my favorite barbecue has to be brisket, which is why today is a special day, because I've made brisket before, but I've never smoked a whole packer brisket before, and that is what we're gonna do today. I've seen the classes that Aaron Franklin has online. I'm gonna take a lot of inspiration from his method. He has a very smart way of doing it. I'm not gonna say this is the best way, but he seems to be an authority on brisket, and I like his approach. It's simple, it makes sense to me, and so that's what we're gonna do today. So I'm happy to be making this video in collaboration with Beef. It's What's for Dinner. On behalf of the Beef Checkoff, we worked together to plan a video around the beauty of beef and that amazing flavor that is created when you smoke beef with fire and wood. And there's some meats that are just made to be smoked, and a brisket is one of them. It's a big, tough cut of meat. It has two muscles on it, a flat and a point. Both of them cook differently. When you think brisket, you think burnt ends. Those come from the point, and the flat is where you get those nice strips from. In the Northeast, you can't really get whole packer briskets, which is what they're called. They usually just cut the point off and sell the flat. So I had to order the brisket I'm about to use today online and had it shipped to me. It basically comes down to trimming it a specific way and then maintaining good clean smoke, ramping up temperatures, and really having a plan for it. When do you want to serve the meat, and then work backwards and make a plan. What temps do you want to be at certain times? When do you want to wrap? When do you think the stall is going to hit? All of these things are going to matter. The main difference in how I'm going to do it is I'm not going to use a offset smoker. One with like the big drum and then a little area where you can make fire out and the air flows through it and out the other side. I'm going to use the grill that I have, which is the SnS Kamado. I've cooked briskets many times, but I've never smoked it this way. I've never had a point and a flat on a brisket. It's gonna cook totally different than it ever has, and it's gonna be that much better because you need all of the fat in the point, which is where you get delicious burnt ends in and all this great intermuscular fat. All of that's gonna keep the flat from drying out. So I've never trimmed a brisket. I've never smoked this type of brisket before. So this is very much a learning experience for you and I. And it's very possible I may screw some things up, but I have a plan and I'm pretty confident in it. I'm pretty confident in my ability to create a clean smoke, to manage the fire. And I think those are the big things that I have to worry about. So I'm gonna follow these steps and we're gonna see what happens. Let's just get right into trimming this guy. First thing you're gonna need, a very sharp knife. Make sure you have a honing steel. This is a boning knife, a fillet knife. It's got some bend to it, and that's gonna give us some flexibility in this thing. We also have the brisket in the refrigerator. It's cold. It's about 8:30. I have the grill already set up outside, so when I wanna light the fires, I know it's gonna take about an hour for it to heat up, and then I'm gonna try and get this brisket on the grill at around 11:30. Ideally, I'm gonna cook it for 12 hours. I'm not gonna need to stoke a fire like you would do all night on an offset. Using the Kamado, it's a little bit more user-friendly. So let's get going. A whole packer brisket. You got the point that lays on top of the flat, and then the flat that comes around here. So you sort of got two sort of muscles. The grains run in different directions. What I feel like I've learned is that what makes Aaron Franklin's barbecue so good is that he's trimming off all of the bits that don't work so that when the thing is cooked, every bite is perfect. Every bite has a little bit of bark, the perfect amount of fat, salt. So really, that's how we're gonna think about trimming this. And we might trim a lot off, but my brother wants all of the trim to make for burgers and sausage and stuff like that, so I don't really feel that bad. So let's get this guy open. I want to open it up fat side so that you don't kind of ruin the meat. And you want to keep all of this juice sort of contained in the bag, and then you want to throw it away immediately. So you see this? It's kind of like a grayish sort of area on the brisket. That's sort of where the cow was split, and it's sort of treated by getting seared, I guess, cooked. So when that cooks down, that's just gonna flake off, and it's just gonna make for a bad slice. What we're gonna do is we're gonna take this and we're gonna slice off a new edge on both sides. And that's just gonna clean it up, it's gonna shape it, and it's also gonna allow us to see how much fat there is on the meat, and we can trim that fat down to 1/4 inch, which is what we want. It's sort of the perfect amount of fat to last through the cook and keep everything moist without there being a huge chunk of fat on the slice when you're done cooking it. So this is the underside of the brisket. You've got this piece that's hanging out here, which will probably sort of shape off a little bit because that's gonna burn. You've got these decal fats. You've got seam fat that's gonna run through here, these different types of fats, and you can feel them, they're super hard. So we're gonna like remove all of these things. We wanna cut this new edge, and we wanna start here. There's this little seam right here and this piece of meat that isn't really, I believe, part of the brisket because there's a seam of fat that runs through it. So that's just part of another muscle that they cut, and that seam runs all the way down till about here, and you can feel it, and then it starts to even out. So what I think I wanna do is start to cut this little piece off. See how there's fat underneath it? That's not part of the brisket. And I'm just gonna make a little mark there. And then I'm gonna follow that all the way down. And then you get this nice, beautiful inside little window into the brisket. Right here, you have that point, which is where all that burnt ends come from. And then over here, you have the flat. And then all this fat, that's too much fat. We can trim all of that down. And now that we cut into it, we can sort of see what all of that looks like. We'll do the same on the other side. Just sort of gonna make a mark there. And this has like this weird piece here. Just gonna take that off. That's just gonna hang out there. I think that's just gonna burn. Again, that's some for my brother. You don't have to sort of take that off, but it's what I wanted to do. And then I'm just gonna create a new edge here. How am I doing? Now this is sort of a weird thing that I wasn't expecting. I felt like this usually sits on the top more, this little piece that's hanging over here. I don't like that it hangs, but I don't think I have much of a choice. So I want to sort of create a new skin on top. I've cleaned up the edges. I want to get all of this gristly stuff out of here. I think I need to keep this fat on here. Maybe I can clean it up a little bit, but I can sort of see down the middle that there's a little bit of a thinness that I want to keep. So right here, right where this starts to go in, I want to cut all of this out and then slowly start to trim down this way. You want curved edges, so we want to sort of take our knife, get down there, and then just start to kind of get to 1/4 inch. Helps to sort of pick it up a little bit, but I don't want to cut too much off. Maybe I want to cut this out a little bit more. So you just want to kind of bend it sometimes to get underneath some areas. And then I sort of want to start here and then trim down. Oh no, I didn't want to do that. Took a little bit too much. So I'm just gonna kind of back off a little bit. It's okay. So here's my big mistake. Took way too much off, and it's right in the middle where I really wanted to protect it. But that's a perfect lesson learned. It's not gonna be the end of the world, but hopefully some of this fat is going to keep that protected. But that's what you want to avoid. You want sort of this stuff here, this nice fat that's pillowy and soft to go all the way across. It's a little bit of a bald spot. It's gonna be okay. I'm just gonna finish up being a little bit more careful, not trying to do it in the reverse way that I should be. Now I gotta get this decal out. So I'm sort of gonna do the same thing. There's all this kind of fat that you can kind of clean up over here and just sort of cut this guy out. That's just a hard fat. That's not gonna render really well. So now I just wanna start to trim around. See, like anything like that, I wanna sort of make sure I don't have stuff like that. And then I round off the corners. Now I'm gonna do the same thing a little bit on this side. Now I want to sort of get rid of this end. I'm just gonna sort of cut. This is the first bite, and there's a little gristle right there. So you don't want that there. So you're just gonna cut it out. Push it out. I'm really scared to go any further. Made some mistakes here with the bald patch, but you know, we're just gonna cover that up with some pepper and salt, and it's not gonna be too bad. This, I feel like maybe I took a little bit too much of the decal out, because some of this stuff that's soft, that's gonna render, so that's a potential pitfall. I'm a little bit worried about this overhang. I'm hoping that's going to hold up and not dry out too much. Usually I feel like that's kind of sitting more on top of the brisket. So I'm just sort of figuring my way through. Like this looked like there was a ton of fat over here, but in reality there wasn't. So I'm not too worried about the trim being perfect. I don't sell this to customers, but you don't really want bald patches. You sort of want 1/4 of an inch all the way across the top. Go for that. If you don't hit it, so what? And this is just gonna put a binder. You could use mustard. I'm gonna use oil. I sort of always use oil. Seasoning. Now basically this is just kosher salt, and it's called 16 mesh or cafe grind black pepper. I didn't grind this myself. I went out and bought some whole 100% Telecherry black peppers, but pre-ground to a certain size. That size is supposed to match the size of kosher salt, so that one is not heavier than the other and you can get an even dispersion. And I just have this empty bottle. It's got some regular holes in it, nothing too fancy. I'm not going to do this because I've already filled this up for a previous cook. But you take 50-50 blend. Find a proportion, you can draw out lines so that they're even, and then just fill up halfway with black pepper, fill up halfway with the salt. And then you've got your seasoning. Sort of use your hand, and with like a sort of shaking side to side, make sure you're shaking up nice so it's nice and even, and then just go back and forth, sort of like a car wash. Oh no! Disaster number one. Here's what I'm gonna do. Shake that off. Okay, I'm gonna hold this and I'm gonna do that again. I'm gonna take my hand and I'm gonna pour it on the hand and then pat. Same down here. I'm just gonna take some of the stuff that fell out and I'm just gonna pat that along here. Now a quick flip. All right, there we have it. Trimmed, seasoned brisket. I feel way more prepared now to do it again. And that's sort of what this is about. I'm gonna learn from the mistakes, see what happens, see how it cuts up at the end, and there you go. It's about 9:30 now. At about 10 o'clock, I wanna light my fire. So earlier today, I just went outside, I set my grill up ahead of time. So all I have to do when I'm ready is to just light it up, get rolling. I just sort of put some applewood chunks down at the bottom of the slow and sear, which is part of my Kamado. Filled it up halfway with some lump charcoal. When I'm ready to get this guy on, I'm just gonna light up the wax cubes, let that preheat for about an hour while this comes to temperature, and then we're gonna get this guy going. So it's 10 p.m. Like I said, it's gonna take about an hour for this thing to get up to temperature. The first temperature I want to start off at is around 245 to 255. Basically want to start cooking this thing a little bit gently. because the big fear in the beginning of the cook is drying out any of the edges. If you dry out the edges in the beginning, maybe by cooking too hot or too fast, then it probably won't make this 12-hour cook, right? So we want to start low around like 245, 250 and cook it there for about the first 3 to 4 or 5 hours. Then we're going to slowly ramp it up, maybe up to like 260, and then when we're getting up to the stall, then you want to kind of ramp it up to about like 280 just to help push it through the stall a little bit. I made my life easy. I got everything ready to go earlier. Now I'm just gonna let that preheat. That's gonna take about 15 or 20 minutes. Now my one concern is it's about 95 degrees right now and humid, and tomorrow it's about to be 100 degrees. I'm concerned that under these conditions it might take faster. So I don't really know how I want to attack that. Basically, we're gonna cook this till the bark gets really kind of crusty. As soon as the bark gets hard and you can feel the meat sort of tense up, then it's sort of a good time for us to sort of wrap. So this is pretty carefree for us. I want to get the brisket on the grill around 11:30. So I jammed up the slow and sear with some lump charcoal. Made sure that there's enough that's going to get me through at least like 5-6 hours of this cook. Next I need to add hot water to the water reservoir. That's going to create steam. It's going to help control and stabilize the temperatures, and it's also going to help smoke adhere to that meat. And since we use these coarse ground pepper and salt, that's going to create this like texture on the meat that is going to aid in this bark formation, because that smoke needs a little bit of a rough surface to adhere to. Fill up the reservoir. Got my thermometer. One part of this thermometer is going to stay here. Another remote thermometer is going to be sitting next to my bed the entire night. I'm going to set alarms throughout the night so that I could check the temps. So I've got one monitoring the indirect side that is going to basically monitor the back end. So I know what the coolest part of the grill, which is going to be all the way over here, is still set out. I'm gonna have the thicker part of the brisket facing the heat, and I'm gonna cook it like that. We're gonna wait till this gets up to 245 degrees and the smoke is clear, and then we're gonna throw the brisket on. Now remember, clean smoke is that sweet smelling smoke. Especially with apple, you get those really sweet kind of aromas. This is just starting to settle down into clean smoke. It was still a little bit acrid. It sort of like burns your nostrils. It doesn't smell good. You're starting to get there. See how much thinner it is? It was so smoky before, but now it's sort of like, it's almost invisible. You can still see it. That's clean smoke. We're ready to get this guy onto the grill. Now when you open this, you don't want to open it up real crazy. You want to let a little bit of this air come through. You don't want any rush of air, and then slowly open it. Now we want to get this on as soon as possible. Now I'm just going to wait for that to get back up to temperature. Wait for it to stabilize at around 245 to 250 is the range I'd like to keep it for the first 3 or 4 hours. I've got this guy, it's gonna be upstairs with me in bed. Right now it's 11:03. And then I'll set an alarm every 2 hours to check on the temps, spritz it. I wanna make sure those edges stay nice and moist. If I see the temp dropping, it's an indication I need more fuel. So I'll come down and I'll add more fuel. Now what I have here is just a little spray bottle filled with apple cider vinegar. It's not gonna flavor it at all, but it's going to help keep some spots moist. And the idea is not to really just drain the whole thing, it's to spray along the edges. Anything you see drying out, you wanna spritz it. So it's about 11:30. Now it's time I can kinda go rest. It's almost 2 o'clock, so it's almost 3 hours. It's been sort of slowly fluctuating, but making its way up to 260. So I didn't want to mess with it. I just let it go however it wants, but I started it off slow, so I think I'm gonna be okay. Now, I want to go in there and make sure that I'm spritzing a little bit. I'm gonna hit the edges in a sort of a side-to-side motion.
Never forget what you are. The rest of the world will not. Wear it like armor. It can never be used to hurt.
I'm just gonna wait for that smoke to sort of settle back down a little bit. That always sort of happens when you open and close it. That's why it's not so great to do that. It'll settle back down in about 5 or 10 minutes. I'm gonna get it back up to temperature, and then I'm gonna try to get some actual sleep. When I check it next at around 3:30-ish, I may want to start to open up the vents a little bit, start to get the temperature up to about 265, 270. So we're gonna open up vents to get them a little hotter, and we'll close them if we want to get them a little cooler. It's about 5:30 in the morning. Let's go to peak. Now is gonna be when I want to start to get up there to around 280-ish. The meat is starting to firm up, it's starting to approach the stall. And at that point, it's gonna look like it's gonna stop cooking. It's gonna stop increasing in temperature, it's gonna firm up and seize up. And what that just is the meat is sweating internally. It's called evaporative cooling. It's sort of cooling itself down like we do when we sweat. That's essentially what the stall is. So we're gonna raise the temperature to kind of push it through and keep the momentum going for this last stage of this unwrapped cook. Yeah, it's 7:30. What is that? 11. I'm at the 8.5 hour mark. Right here you could start to see fat inside. The intermuscular fat is starting to render. That's what we want. Now we want to wrap it. I've got 2 sheets of butcher paper. You can use aluminum foil for this. I have butcher paper. It's what I kind of wanted to use today. It's double layered so that in the center you have double the wrap. I'm gonna throw it right on here. What I wanna do, I'm just gonna fold over and I'm gonna pull in tight, sort of wrap that underneath there, and then fold the paper. And again, and you just fold this last piece in underneath, and there you have it. I forgot to give it one last spritz in the bag. I think there's enough fat that it's gonna be okay. So let's just get it back onto the grill. Now it's 8 o'clock. I'm probably gonna cook it for another hour and a half and see where we're at. We're gonna probe it with a thermometer. We're mainly gonna probe for tenderness and just see what the temps are at. We're looking for anywhere above 203, 205 in that range. That's usually gonna mean it's nice and buttery tender. Been about 11 hours. We've been kind of bouncing in and out of sleep. Sleeping every hour, a little 30-minute nap here, a little hour nap there. That's the reality of cooking something like this. So I just want to probe for tenderness. I want to see where we're at. Like I suspected, the excessive heat sort of helped cook this thing about a half hour sooner than I expected. That goes to show maybe it's colder. Maybe it's gonna take longer for you. Depending on the time of year, you really have to pay attention to that. Now it's so hot out that if I'm just gonna let this sit out, it's gonna keep carryover cooking. It's sort of like a Cambro outside right now. So I'm just gonna leave it wrapped, not gonna throw it into a cooler or anything. Just gonna let it chill for about an hour and a half. Let everything sort of relax. This is maybe the most important part of barbecuing, is letting that rest. I can't tell you how many times I've tried to cook something like this on a barbecue all day, waited without any patience to the moment it was done, didn't let it rest, and it just was subpar. Letting this thing rest is going to make it insanely delicious. So that's what we're gonna do now. Get my coffee, I'm gonna shower up, I'm gonna get this day going, try and wake up a little bit, and we're gonna eat some brisket. This is the beauty of a long cook like that. You get to enjoy something amazing afterwards. So it's about 1 o'clock. This thing's been resting for a couple hours. There you have it. I don't know how we did. It smells beautiful, almost like chocolatey. Now all I'm concerned about is if that seam fat that is in between the point and the flat is fully rendered and the top fat is rendered nicely. So let's see what we got. Looks like it's juicy. Nice bark. This may have dried out a little bit, but let's see. Serrated bread knife. This is gonna be the first cut, right? So the grain is running like this on the flat. So I wanna cut like this. And I'm gonna cut till about here. And then I'm gonna start to cut this way on the point and the flat because the muscle runs differently there. And the way that he cuts is almost like a pool cue, not like I normally cut. So he's guiding the knife with his finger. So let's just do it. We're looking for like pencil thickness slices. And I'm starting at this angle and I'm still gonna make my way across like that. Now sort of this is the center of the flat, and that's sort of a good indication of you doing your job well. Does it just pull apart? The fat's rendered nicely. Now this is like the money shot. See this? I would have liked this to just be a little bit more rendered. It's gonna be fine, it's perfectly tender, but just to be a little bit more rendered would be to my liking. But it's super juicy, it's beautiful. So I'm just gonna do the same thing and then also work my way at an angle a little bit as well.
It's right next door to my house. It is? Why, that's practically the hand of Providence.
So you can get more bark on each bite. So this piece has a little bit more of this fat underneath. So we're gonna take it to a certain point. And then I like to cut the flat off of this part and then make little like burnt end pieces with this point. And there you have it. Texas barbecue brisket. So what you see along this outer ridge here is called the smoke ring. That's a good indication that you had some good smoke, that it adhered to the meat, and that's that flavor that you get when you eat it, that delicious sweet smoke flavor. It stayed relatively moist during the cooking process. A lot of that could be attributed to that mop that we sprayed on it, that apple cider vinegar mop. It just helps some of these edges from really drying out in the cooking process. But there's something about beef and smoke that makes this ridiculous flavor, and it's highlighted in brisket. We smoked it with that apple wood, and that apple wood gives it this really sweet, smoky flavor. Not too strong, but it's just sort of what I like. I'm from New York, we grow apples here. Apple wood seems to make sense. The flat stayed nice and moist, as you can see, and it's nice and tender. I don't see, as tender as it is, it doesn't seem like it fully rendered in the middle. Like it could have probably used another 20 or 30 minutes. What happened was I set my alarm for 3:30 and I think I slept through it until 5:30. And when I woke up, temps were at 200. So I had to run downstairs, add more coal, and something in that process probably could have affected this ability to fully render all that fat. It's rendered and it's delicious and it's pull apart tender, but it's not fully rendered. And that's the most difficult part, is cooking this juicy and tender, especially in this mid part, while fully rendering out all of the point muscle and this seam fat that runs between the point and the flat. We got some really good burn ends. I like the tenderness all around, and I'm pretty happy with how the fat did render most places. I'd call it a success. And if you can bang out a brisket that's sort of like this, you don't need to go to Texas. You could bring the best of Texas anywhere you are. Perfection is hard to achieve in barbecue. You can only hope to get something that you're happy with and then incrementally improve on that each time. I want to thank Beef It's What's for Dinner for sponsoring this video. I think it's time for me to get some rest. So that's all I have today. Hope you enjoyed this one. I'll see you next time. Until then, take care of yourself and go feed yourself.